For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. Here we are at Reasoning Through the Bible. We're going through Matthew chapter 24, and Jesus is giving a sermon. He's giving to his disciples. They've asked him some questions, and he's given them some great details in regards to when he's coming and the signs of him coming. And we went through the first half of chapter 24 on our last session. We're going to finish up 24 today. And this is one of the spots that are there that we'll talk about in more details. But while we're having cataclysmic events that Jesus is talking about, he also notes here that the world is going to continue to be going on, acting just as normal and not aware of some of the things that are going on. We're told several times here to be aware, to know what's going on. These are the signs. This is what's going to happen. There's going to be the great sign of the lightning through the sky and other things that we're going to see here. And so, Glenn, as we go through here and talk about that, I find it fascinating that while the earth is going to be, or the world is going to be in a cataclysmic state, at the same time, they're going to be out there not aware of what's about to take place, or at least a great many of them are.
And not only that, but Jesus tells us several times in this Matthew 24 chapter that don't be deceived.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the first thing he says when the disciples ask the question. He says, don't be deceived. There's going to be a lot of false prophets out there that's going to mislead many. And in verse 26, there's going to be people that come up and say, oh, he's over here in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus is over here with our group. Or follow this, follow that. And he's saying, no. When I come back, it's going to be so obvious.
Right.
It's just like lightning going all the way across the night sky. Nobody's going to miss it. So if there's any doubt at all on whether Jesus has come back, he hasn't. Because he's saying it's going to be so obvious that we won't have to guess. And he's saying there's going to be false prophets that are going to mislead many, many people. And so that's what he's telling us,
right,
is watch out. There's going to be all these rumors of wars and rumors of death and destruction. Don't panic.
Right. Don't be frightened.
It's going to come.
Right.
And there's going to be, in fact, it's going to get worse and worse. And it's going to be so bad that people's hearts are going to fail, but don't panic.
Right.
I'll be there with you. And that's what he's telling us here. And one verse we missed from last time, verse 28, it says, where the corpse is, there the vultures will gather.
Right.
Or some of the translations say eagles.
Yeah.
And I always was looking, when I first read that, for some mysterious, prophetic, symbolic meaning of what he means.
Yeah.
And it's really, really simple. He's just saying, like, when you see vultures circling overhead, what do you conclude?
There's something dead.
Something's dead.
Yeah. And
something happened. So that's a sign.
It's just an illustration, right? And that people know that what you just said, you can know that there's something dead wherever the vultures are circling.
Just a sign.
Yeah.
And so that's what he's talking about here, are signs. And this next passage, this is one of the reasons, is he mentions eight or 10 specific things here that we could see when Jesus comes back. Mm-hmm. And so he's telling us a fair number of specifics. And so let me read this, and then we can talk about it. I'm starting in Matthew 24, verse 29. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. So great signs there.
Yeah.
And when we combine with it the one just prior to that with the lightning coming from one end of the sky to the other. I counted 10 different things.
Right.
And one of the things he's doing here, Steve, is he's actually quoting a big double handful of Old Testament passages.
Right.
And it would be almost tedious to go through them all. But he's quoting a series of things of which these Jewish audience that he had in front of him at the time would have understood. There's a long series of things in the Old Testament that talks about the day of the Lord.
Right.
The great and terrible day of the Lord. And so that's what he's all bringing together here is a bunch of Old Testament references, and he's talking about these grand cataclysmic events. These are all things that are going to be so obvious that no one would miss them, no matter where they are on the earth.
Correct. And so it's speaking of a time, again, that's in the future, because we haven't had this great of a cataclysmic event before.
So in verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, and as we've mentioned before, there will be a great tribulation period, what's called the 70th week of Daniel. That's a 7-year period that's mentioned in Daniel chapter 9. That's going to be the great tribulation that is worse than anything that's ever happened in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And so he's saying after the tribulation of those days, and then he goes into this, the sun darkened and the moon gives its light, et cetera, and there's like 9 things in this list. And one of them is that the heavens are going to be shaken. And verse 30, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. So where else do we, in biblical end times events, do we ever see this idea of the Son of Man, that's Jesus, appearing in the sky?
Thinking over in Thessalonians, First Thessalonians chapter 2, I believe, right?
I forget the address, but he's talking in Thessalonians about us meeting Jesus in the air and in the clouds. And so there's a series of passages, this being one of them, that talks about meeting Jesus in the air or in the clouds, in the sky.
Right.
And there's other ones that talk about Jesus touching the earth. And so just as our listeners, just remember those. And when we get to places like 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, it'll make more sense.
And at Jesus' ascension, as he was going up and the disciples were looking upward, the angel appeared and said, "What are you gazing at? So as the Son of Man has gone into heaven, so he will come back again." So we're told at that time he's going to be coming back from the sky.
And so the next part of that sentence, then all the tribes of the earth will mourn.
Yeah.
That means everybody on the earth, not just in Israel, but everybody on the earth is going to be sad. Why? Because of the great tribulation.
Right.
And they will see the Son of Man. Who's the they? The they is all the tribes of the earth.
Right, all the nations.
So he's saying here, just the grammar of the sentences, every tribe on the earth is going to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the sky with great power and glory.
And we've discussed this in other sessions. In past history, that wasn't possible as far as, or we wouldn't think that it would be possible. How would it happen? And it didn't. But we do have the possibility for that to happen in our world today. We have the satellites that are circling the globe. When anything happens, you see a video up of it. And so it's definitely something that in our day and age, it's possible. So not only did it not happen, but it was also probably not probable that it would happen or be able to happen in the years past, centuries past.
So again, just reasoning through verse by verse,
critical thinking,
sentence by sentence. We have here things that could not have happened already. They have to be in the future simply because the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky so that all the people around the globe would be mourning and seeing the Son of Man, Jesus, coming in the clouds. That has not happened yet. That only happens at the second return of Christ.
Other things that people that don't believe Scripture and believe of future events that are described, part of the future events is this great cataclysm, this great tribulation, there's going to be many lives that are going to be lost over the globe in this 7-year period, and actually the 3.5-year period. And people go, the non-believers, there's no way that there's that many. It can't be that bad. It can't be that cataclysmic. It can't have that many people die in that short amount of time. But I'll say that just here a few years back, there was a tsunami over in the Indonesia area, and 250,000 people died in the span of a few minutes when that tsunami came in and then took them back out to sea. So there are things that happen. I mean, 250,000 people, that's a lot of people to be taken away and lose their life in a matter of minutes. So don't ever say that it can't happen.
So then when we compare that to the things we read about in the book of Revelation, where large percentages of the earth being killed, it lines up.
Yes. Yeah.
Now in verse 31, he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is end times things. And they will gather together his elect, or his chosen ones, from the four winds,
right, from
one end of the sky to the other. So Steve, how do we explain that? Is that gathering together whom?
These are what we would refer to as the tribulation saints, the ones that have expressed their belief and faith in Jesus Christ during this tribulation period, the ones that haven't been martyred yet, right? That he'll also be gathering them together.
So yes, the elect or the chosen ones are people that are followers of the Lord Jesus that are on the earth. And what's happening here is Jesus is coming back. There's these grand signs in the sky that everybody in the world sees. The tribes of the earth mourn because suddenly they realize the story of Jesus is real.
Right.
And here he is in front of me, and I wasn't following him, so now I'm sad. That's why they're mourning, is because now they've realized they were wrong all their lives, and now Jesus has come back, and I really don't want to face him. That's why they're mourning, and because of just all the mass death. But at the same time, these angels are going to, at the sound of a trumpet, gather together all of the true followers of Christ.
I want to bring out here that we've talked about how the Jesus of today is God is a loving God, and that soft part of it.
And he is loving.
He is, yes. But we also know that God is a wrathful God, and that sin is going to be dealt with. This is when God is dealing with that sin. This is when the wrath is showing during this period of when he's dealing with that. But here's the amazing thing to me. Even at that period of time, and when he is pouring out his wrath on the globe, on the world, okay, he has provided through those protected witnesses that we talked about in the last session, that to spread the gospel, he still provided for people to be able to come to him and believe in him and express faith in him, even during this great wrathful time that's going on. I just find that amazing and loving in the midst of the wrath, so to speak.
It tells us a lot about our Lord, that he is both completely fully loving and completely fully just. And a just judge always has to put wrath upon those that violate the righteousness.
Right.
And so he is both of those at the same time, which is very hard for us to understand.
Yep.
The main thing in this section of Matthew 24 is that there's these grand, large, cataclysmic things. These are not small, subtle things. There's signs in the sky that everybody on the earth will see.
Right.
And so these things, when they happen, are going to be very obvious. Very obvious. And the good news is he's going to gather together his chosen ones from the four winds, and then we will have fellowship with him. So, have all the tribes of the earth seen Jesus yet? No.
Right.
And so these events in Matthew 24 are still future. So, Steve, start at verse 32 and read the next 3 verses down to 35. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to Reasoning Through the Bible today. Don't miss this opportunity to grow in your knowledge and love of God's Word. Subscribe to Reasoning Through the Bible on your favorite podcast platform.
Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away.
Now, this particular passage has gotten much discussion over the centuries by Bible scholars, dealing with who is this generation. Was this generation, when he says in verse 34, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place.
Right.
And so was he talking about the people standing in front of them at the time, this generation that's alive right now, or is he talking about this generation being those at the end of days that see all these things? That's our question.
And that's it. That you just answered it. That sets the timing of what generation that he's talking about. He says the ones that see these things. Well, what are these? These things is everything that he just talked about, that he just described, where he just described at the end of the tribulation, this is what's going to happen. These events, these signs. And so that's what sets the generation that he's talking about, are the ones that see all of those signs, all of those events, everything that is going on that he's been talking about.
And too many times, I think people grasp concepts and not really what the text is saying. And they'll take this concept of this generation and then they start talking about it in broad terms. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much disagreement. If we just look at what the words specifically say. I mean, look what it says. When you see all these things. What things? All those list of 10 things that we just talked about. Jesus appearing in the sky, the lightning, the angels coming back, blowing the trumpets, the sign of the Son of Man in the clouds. Not just the leafing out of the fig tree, because it's plural. These things. And so when you see all these things, recognize that he, Jesus, is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until what? All these things take place. So what's the generation? It's the generation that sees all these things. And
this generation is bookmarked by these things prior to it and these things after it. And so it's very clear. And yes, it's been debated, and the focus comes in on this generation. That's where the debate starts coming in, and the word study of what generation means, and all of that. Again, when it's very clear that he's talking about these things, that's what sets the time of what that generation is.
And that's why when we dealt with the last few verses, we took so much detail talking about, for example, all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they, all the tribes of the earth, will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. There's no way to make that symbolic. It's not symbolic of something that means something other than what the plain language of the thing say. I mean, you can say, okay, the sun going to be darkened means something, but it's still a symbol is a symbol of something real. It's a symbol of reality. So there's a list of 10 large cataclysmic signs that when you see all these things, that's the generation. And that was not the generation that was standing there simply because all the tribes of the earth didn't mourn. Jesus didn't come back. They didn't gather the elect from the four winds, and on and on and on.
And
it has to be end times.
And again, we're using the word cataclysmic. Let's just take one for instance. This when the sun will be darkened. What does that actually mean? Well, we have eclipses that take place, okay? But this is something that all the earth is going to see. This is something all the earth is going to witness. The shadow of the moon that goes over the sun when it goes, it only actually covers about a 50-mile area on the earth that actually see the total eclipse. And of course, that's also moving as it goes as well as it passes over. This is something that's going to see a complete darkening of the sun. Now, exactly what that means, I don't know, but it is something that all the earth sees and all the nations see. So again, we haven't had anything documented that in the past, and I don't think that it's just an eclipse. I think it's something that is cataclysmic. That's why we're using that particular word. It's something that's great. All of these things are something that impacts the whole earth at the same time.
Yes. And what that is, we can only speculate,
Yes.
and we tend to not want to do that.
Correct.
But as you just said, whatever it is, it's going to be so huge that clouds all over the earth are affected, the sunlight's affected, the color of the light on the moon's affected.
Correct.
And all the tribes of the earth will see Jesus return.
Right.
And that has to be future. So this generation that's mentioned here are the ones that will see all these things,
Correct.
which is just what it says in the passage.
Yep.
So here's a question. In verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Will Jesus ever be forgotten?
No. He's the creator. He's God. So no.
Is the Bible ever going to get to the point where, oh, that was some old book that nobody ever reads anymore? What was that the Christians used to study? I don't remember.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
What does he say? Heaven and earth going to pass away,
Yeah.
but my words will not pass away.
Right.
His words are eternal.
Right.
His words will always be here.
And it also means that it's going to happen.
So the lesson for us is what? The lesson is that we should look for the signs,
Right.
not just the fig tree leafing out, but all those signs that we know that the time's near. The fig tree leafing out says you start seeing these things happen, hey, you know it's time. And so if we just know what the text says, then we'll be able to recognize, oh, the things I'm seeing, that lines up with what I read in the scriptures. Now, most of the rest of chapter 24 is talking about gathering people.
Yeah.
Gathering people. Now, there's three options. He's going to tell some stories here, but when we try to untangle what he actually is talking about, there's only really three options for gathering people. He's either gathering Israel,
Right.
or he's gathering the Christians in the sense of the church, Jew and Gentile, or he's gathering non-Christians. That's the only three options. That exhausts the possibility.
Right.
So let's go ahead and read this, and then we'll figure out which one. Is it Israel, is it the Christians, or is it the non-believers? And so, Steve, start at verse 36 and read down to 44.
But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then there will be two men in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one will be left. Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason, you must always be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will.
Okay, so again, he's talking about people being gathered. And one question here before we really jump into that, verse 36. Of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Is that a problem? That the Father knows something that Jesus the Son doesn't? Does this create some issue with, because we've built the case as we've gone through Bible study that Jesus is God.
Right.
And God knows everything.
Yeah.
But here we have the Son not knowing something.
Well, but Jesus is also fully man, right? So he's fully God, but he's also fully man. So no, I don't see any problem with this.
It's not a problem for two reasons. One of what you just said.
Yeah.
He is fully human.
Yeah.
And also fully God. So in the sense that he's human, he had to give up some attributes.
Right.
He's not omnipresent, which is not present everywhere like God is.
Right.
And so there's other characteristics of God that when you take on humanity, you cannot exercise. And so his divine nature did indeed know things, but that the human nature did not.
Right.
And so there's another explanation for this, is that, yes, both the Son, Jesus, and the Father are God, but they are different roles.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no problem with the different roles of the Trinity having different responsibilities of the Trinity. The Holy Spirit has a role that the Son does not have. And so there's really no problem with there being different roles in the three members of the Trinity.
Right.
And the other thing here is that this also tells us when we say in verse 36, nor the Son, but the Father alone, that tells us that the Son and the Father are distinct. They are not the same person. Jesus is not the Father. Jesus is the Son. And the grammar of this sentence, if we just take it literally with what it says, we will walk away concluding that the Son and the Father are distinct persons. And that's what the Trinity is always taught.
Within the Godhead, right? Still one God.
One and only one God.
Correct.
Not zero and not two or more.
Right.
Only one.
Yep.
But three persons with distinct personality.
Yep.
And so Jesus, while he was on earth, he set aside some of his divine nature in a temporary sense. So verse 36, note that this tells us that Jesus is not the Father, for there's things that are distinct about each. And then he gets into the story of Noah in Genesis.
Yep.
So here's a question. Why was the earth flooded back in Genesis? What was the reason?
It was a period of God, a judgment. It was a period of God pouring out his wrath.
Pouring out his wrath because of judgment on people.
Because it tells us that the heart of man had become continually evil. It was the only thing that mankind was thinking about. And so we have Noah and his family who were protected and righteous, that worship God, and the rest was a judgment on the people.
And so that's what it tells us back in Genesis, is that the world was corrupt and full of violence.
Right.
And so that's why God was flooding the earth for judgment.
Right.
And so here in Matthew 24, verse 37, the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For in those days before the flood, and he goes on talking about things that are just common everyday things.
Yeah.
They were eating and drinking and getting married. They're just going through normal everyday things.
Right.
And what's the sense here? Before we get into kind of the nuances, the sense here is what? They're just going through life.
Right. Not
back
aware
in the days
of what's about to happen.
So what happened to those people back in Noah's day?
They perished.
They perished quickly.
Right.
They were just going through life. What's this?
Yeah.
I'm not worried too much about God. I've just got my stuff to do. And suddenly destruction came on them.
Correct.
That's the point here. He's saying they're just going through life until the day that Noah entered the ark. So suddenly one day, this flood was on you.
Right.
And they didn't understand until the flood came and took them all away. So that's what he's talking about here, is that people were just going through life and suddenly God's judgment came upon them. And he's saying the coming of Jesus is going to be just like that. People are going to be just going through life and suddenly God's judgment just lands on them.
And it says that they didn't understand what was going on, which again, if we just pause and just think about that a little bit, this is a huge ark. This is a huge, that has it. It wasn't built in a few days. It was built over a period of time, and it was very large. And so you're thinking of, well, why didn't the people, surely the people were asking, why are you building this? Why is this going on? And Noah's answer to them, I've been told to build it, whatever it might be. But they knew that something or they should have known that something was about to happen, because you have this huge sign
Right.
of an ark that's being built, but yet they didn't understand. They didn't know. And so we kind of see the same thing that's happening at this particular point in time. Jesus has talked about that lawlessness is increasing, that love is growing cold, and that now we're seeing that people are just going about their regular business on, and yet they're not understanding what is about to happen. And so that's
Right.
kind of a curious thing to me, that there are signs. We've been told that there are things, but yet there's some that just don't believe, and some that they just aren't aware.
They must have ignored Noah
Yeah,
and didn't really believe his message, or
Yeah.
they would have repented and God would have saved them. That's
Right.
God's pattern.
Yep.
But they ignored Noah, even though there was this very large thing called the ark being built for a
Right.
long period of time. Same thing here. Christianity, in the words of Jesus, are not a small thing. It's a big thing. And people have been proclaiming it for many years. And yet there's people that are just going about their business, eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage and not paying attention. Anything wrong with eating?
No,
Anything wrong with getting married?
no,
Just anything wrong with just doing common things in life? No. No, that's so. When does it become a problem?
Whenever you ignore that something is happening. I mean,
When you ignore God,
yeah.
you ignore God's message, that's when it becomes a problem.
And that's what he gives that illustration in verse 43 of saying that if the head of the household knew that he was going to be robbed on a certain night, he'd take precautions against the
Right.
thief, right? So here it is. I mean, it's an illustration that they're just ignoring God, to your point, and it's a willful thing that they're ignoring, right?
So it says in verse 39, they did not understand until the flood came
Yeah,
and took them away.
yeah,
So the idea here, again, just going through life, nothing wrong with just doing common everyday things. It is a problem when you're ignoring God.
right,
And so that's what they were doing. And that's what people in our day are doing. Just doing normal things, but they're ignoring God. And just like the people in Noah's day, judgment's going to land on them suddenly one day.
right,
And just because it's been this way all of my life doesn't mean that judgment will not come. God's patience will be filled up, and there will come a point where he pours out his wrath on all people. And that's what he's saying here.
right,
And he's saying here in verse 40, there are going to be 2 men in the field, and judgment's going to come on one of them. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, and judgment's going to come on them. That's what he's saying here.
yep,
And so he says they did not know until the flood came. It was a surprise. What's going to happen to these people when Jesus returns? Can anything be done to save these people? What can we do?
tell them the gospel.
Who's going to do that?
Well, at the time of the tribulation, right, it's going to be those witnesses. But in today's time, it's us. We should be telling people now about God, about Jesus, about the gospel, that they can have salvation, that they need salvation, and the reason why they need salvation, because there's going to be a day of judgment that's going to be coming. And so if we happen to be secure in our salvation and not concerned about our neighbors and others or our family members, then we need to think twice about that type of a attitude that we have towards others.
So the warning from Jesus at the end of this is in verse 42. And what does he tell us?
Be on the alert.
Be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. That's what
Right.
he's telling us.
Right.
That's the message. Now, a little bit of Bible teaching nuance here with this. When he says in verse 38 that people were eating and drinking until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them away.
Right.
And then the next 2 verses talks about 2 men in the field, one's going to be taken and one left.
Yeah.
And 2 women, and one's taken and one's left.
Yep.
People have taken this a couple of different ways over the centuries. I believe what he's saying here is he's comparing the people, the non-believers in Noah's day were taken. Therefore, here, when he's talking about the 2 men and the 2 women and one's taken, it's sort of taken away in judgment.
Right.
There are people that disagree, but I think that if you just read the sense of the paragraph there, it's not talking about the rapture. taking away would be a good thing. No, it's taken away in judgment, just like the people in Noah's day.
Yeah, and until this study, that's how I took it. I took it these verses to be speaking of the rapture of the church. And of course, as we were studying through this, and Glenn, you and I were discussing this, I went back and re-looked at this. I still personally, I leave a little bit of a door open that it could be talking about the rapture, but I think the overall evidence points to that it is talking about the one taken is the one that's taken away in judgment. The one that left is the one that is left with God, right? And it's not the one taken away in the rapture. Let me just give a couple of reasons, though, why I initially thought that. One is because, and why I've changed my position on it. One is because the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. Well, during the tribulation period, people are going to, well, you would think that they would know what's going on. So that was one reason. The other reason is, but that day, no hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven. But we see here in a little bit later in some of the other Gospels that same phrase is used, and it is talking specifically about the time of tribulation. And so I can't just take that one verse or that phrase and say, oh, that's only talking about the rapture as well. And then the 40 and 42, 2 men in the field, one will be taken. I'd always taken that was taken up. And so, again, further study, because there's two different words that are used in the time of Noah took and the taken there in 40 and 41. It all comes back to that. I believe this is still talking about the tribulation period. And that's the last reason. Everything here that Jesus is talking about, the signs, everything else before, is all talking about the tribulation period. And the parables that he's going to give here in a little bit of being alert, watchful, those are, again, talking about the tribulation period and those end times. And so to take and insert into it, oh, this particular part is the rapture, I've kind of come to the part that, no, it makes more sense that it's a continuation of the flow of what the conversation is. And so I don't have any issues or problems, but I do leave a little bit of a door opening that it could be. My final sense is that we're going to find out one day.
We'll find out.
Right.
So one of the main takeaways, starting in verse 42, you do not know which day your Lord is coming.
Right.
But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known what time of night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into.
Right.
So how should we live while we're waiting for the Lord to return?
Be on the alert and watchful.
Be on the alert, watchful, know that he could come back any minute.
Yeah.
Are we in danger of saying, oh, it's been all this time, therefore Jesus probably not going to come back for a long time. I can do whatever I want and then have time to get ready just before he gets here.
Right. Paul warns of that in one of his epistles, that, be aware of the people that are out there saying that, oh, the Lord hasn't come yet, and so therefore he's not going to come. And that was in the early first century. So, yeah, here we are thousands of years later, but we should still be alert and watchful.
If I knew that the Lord was going to come back 4 years from now on a Tuesday, how would I act?
You might for the first 3 years, you might go out fishing and not be on the alert or watchful, right? And then all of a sudden at the last hour, so to speak, oh, I better get everything in ready and get everything prepared because the Lord's coming on Tuesday.
So that's the lesson here.
Yeah.
We should live every day as if the Lord could come back today. And I want to use my time wisely. I don't want to be silly and frivolous. Nothing wrong with getting married, eating, drinking, going through life. It's just we need to have God in all those things so that when he does come back, he finds us doing what he gave us to do when he went away. So we don't know the day or the hour. Acts 1:7 says we don't know the times or the seasons. So times being years and seasons being months. So when we compare this to Acts 1, we don't know the day, we don't know the hour, we don't know the year, and we don't know the month.
Right.
And so we don't know when he's going to come back. And we don't want to be distracted. So next section, verse 45, who then is the faithful and sensible servant who the master put in charge of his household to give him their food in the proper time? Blessed is that servant who his master finds doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that servant will come out on a day when he doesn't expect him, in an hour which he does not know, and he will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So does that sound like Jesus is going to come back and treat everybody with a nice hug?
Yeah, no. And going through this sessions, Jesus starts now using a method of teaching through parables like he had done before. And so we're going to see here in Matthew 4 parables. There's another one that's recorded over in Mark. And then Jesus gives the definition of what those parables mean. That's all done in the next chapter, in chapter 25. But this is the first of the parables that we're seeing that Jesus is giving in his illustrations. And
it's really plain. It almost doesn't need any explanation, in the sense that he's saying, don't be a lazy person that's not doing what the Lord wants you to do. He could come back any minute and going off and getting drunk and doing all these things. No. If you do, he'll come back, and it says here, cut you in pieces and assign you a place with the hypocrites. He's basically saying the non-believers are the ones that don't do what we ask you to do while the Lord's waiting to come back.
Yeah, all of these parables are talking about watchfulness, readiness, and diligence. And so that's the messages, the main messages that we're seeing throughout all of these parables that Jesus is giving and going to give in the next chapter.
And the next chapter we'll get to next time. Chapter 25 has more of these parables. They're almost easier to understand because they are parables, but they're very valuable. It still tells us about end time things when the Lord comes back. But I hope all of our audience has found this valuable. When we do verse by verse, then we are able to make a lot of clarity with these things. And that's what we do here on Reasoning Through the Bible.